When Operation Desert Storm began, Iraq possessed roughly 5,500 tanks, nearly 4,000 artillery pieces, and tens of thousands of armored vehicles, one of the largest ground forces in the world in 1991. On paper, it was a massive war machine. Yet in just 100 hours of ground combat, most of that power was neutralized. This video traces each layer of the vehicles that actually went into battle to show what Iraq brought to the battlefield and why that still was not enough to prevent such a rapid defeat. In the Kuwait theater of 1991, Iraq deployed a very dense tank force on the front line. On paper, this was the backbone, meant to hold ground and block coalition breakthroughs. But once the battlefield was forced into static fighting, Iraqi tanks lost the very thing that gave them strength: mobility. The T-72 was Iraq's most important main battle tank during Desert Storm. Iraq fielded two main groups: early imported T-72 Ural models and the T-72 Lion of Babylon, assembled domestically to the T-72 M1 standard. In theory, the Lion of Babylon was expected to have better frontal protection, but the build quality was inconsistent. The greatest strength of the T-72 did not lie in its name, but in something very practical: its 125mm gun. If used correctly, it was fully capable of defeating armored targets at standard combat ranges. The problem was that in Kuwait, the T-72 was rarely employed as a mobile force. Many tanks were dug in and buried in sand, staying in place to fire defensively, fighting as fixed strongpoints. Once stationary, the difference between the Ural and the Lion of Babylon became almost irrelevant, because the tank now resembled an armored gun rather than a breakthrough spearhead. And when the opponent enjoyed superior reconnaissance and long-range firepower, a stationary target rarely had much chance. Many T-72 tanks were detected and neutralized before they could ever engage in a true tank versus tank fight. The T-72 was not junk, but Iraq committed it to a type of battle that stripped away its greatest advantage from the very beginning. If the T-72 formed the front line, the T-62 was not a main force but was used to intersperse between defensive belts. The T-62 dated back to the 1960s, and by 1991, it was already obsolete compared to the pace of modern warfare. What kept the T-62 on the battlefield was not because it was good, but because it was easy to operate, rugged, and simple to maintain, qualities that matter greatly when logistics are under strain. It could still support infantry, engage light targets, and hold positions in less decisive areas. But when facing modern main battle tanks head-on, the T-62 had virtually no chance. Its observation and fire control systems did not allow rapid reaction at long range, while its level of protection was insufficient to absorb hits. The T-62 did not collapse due to mechanical failure. It failed because it entered a 1991 battlefield with capabilities rooted in the 1960s, when the T-54 and T-55 made up the most numerous portion of Iraq's tank force. They reflected decades of accumulation, bought in large numbers, kept in service for a long time, and easy to repair. On equipment lists, these numbers created the impression of great strength, but modern war does not score by quantity. With thin armor, limited firepower, and poor situational awareness, the T-54/55 struggled to survive against accurate long-range fire. Many were destroyed while stationary. Many others were abandoned when defensive lines collapsed, unable to withdraw or no longer organized to fight. The T-54/55 made Iraq numerous, but not strong, in a war where speed and precision firepower determined outcomes. The Type 59 and Type 69 were attempts to extend the life of the T-54/55 chassis through incremental improvements. Some variants received better optics and auxiliary equipment, allowing crews to improve observation under limited conditions. Compared to the original versions, they offered slightly better situational awareness. But that was not enough to turn an old platform into a vehicle capable of surviving modern warfare. The aging chassis, limited protection, and modest firepower did not produce a meaningful leap in capability, leaving the Type 59 and Type 69 still vulnerable to opponents who could detect and strike quickly and accurately. This was a clear example of the boundary between technical upgrades and battlefield capability. Some improvement, but not a change to the game itself. When tank units could no longer maintain mobility, the burden of holding ground shifted to mechanized infantry. Iraq fielded many infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers, but numbers alone were only a necessary condition. The sufficient condition was formation organization and firepower coordination, something they did not have time to establish under battlefield pressure. The BMP-1 was originally designed to carry infantry alongside tank formations, delivering troops to the line of contact while providing integrated fire support. It mounted a small caliber gun and the AT-3 Sager anti-tank missile, a very typical IFV configuration of its era. During Desert Storm, however, the BMP-1 often did not perform its intended role of transporting and supporting infantry. Many were pushed onto the front line as direct fire assault vehicles, even used like light tanks. Once separated from infantry and lacking cover, the BMP-1's thin armor quickly revealed its limits. Losses, therefore, came fast, often before infantry could even deploy. The BMP-1 was not bad at its intended role. The problem was that Iraq forced it to do a job it was never designed to perform. The BMP-2 represented a clear improvement over the BMP-1, most notably through its 30mm automatic cannon, which allowed faster and more flexible engagement at close range. Iraq typically assigned the BMP-2 to elite units such as the Republican Guard, as it was considered a more premium vehicle within the IFV category. In theory, the BMP-2 could effectively engage light targets, mechanized infantry, and even low-flying helicopters. In practice, however, it often operated in a fragmented manner and lacked coordination with tanks and infantry. When a more capable vehicle is still employed using old methods, its technical advantages exist only on paper. The BMP-2 clearly demonstrated one thing: upgrading weapons cannot replace formation coordination. Unlike IFVs, vehicles such as the MTLB, BTR-50, BTR-60, and M113 primarily served transport, command, and forward logistics roles. They were not designed to be thrown into high-intensity combat. Put bluntly, their main mission was to move personnel and keep the flow of forces from breaking down. During Desert Storm, most of this group was used largely according to its intended function, but used correctly did not mean safe. Thin armor and limited self-defense weapons made them extremely vulnerable once detected and engaged at long range, especially while moving or withdrawing. These battle taxis did their job, but the battlefield did not give them much chance to survive. When mechanized formations were pushed into a passive posture, the need for reconnaissance and security became even more critical. The problem was that ground reconnaissance only has value when it has room to breathe. In Kuwait, that room was suffocated. The BRDM-2 was a standard reconnaissance vehicle. Fast, mobile, with a small crew, suited for probing and providing early warning to rear formations. In conventional warfare, it could operate wide and deep. During Desert Storm, however, the BRDM-2 struggled to perform its role. Light reconnaissance vehicles were thinly armored to begin with. Once detected, they had almost no ability to protect themselves. Instead of bringing back information, many reconnaissance vehicles were neutralized before they could complete their mission. This was the moment when ground reconnaissance exposed its fatal weakness. When the enemy sees first, you no longer have concealment with which to scout. The EE-9 Cascavel was a wheeled fire reconnaissance vehicle, armed with a 90mm gun. It was suitable for area security, protecting secondary routes, and engaging light targets or older armored vehicles. Its strengths lie in high mobility and relatively compact firepower on a wheeled chassis. But when placed into a high-intensity combat environment, the Cascavel's thin armor became a major liability. Its 90mm gun also made little difference against modern main battle tanks. Without adequate cover and support, the Cascavel was easily destroyed or forced to be abandoned. The Cascavel performed well on the right playing field. Desert Storm was not that field. When mechanized forces could no longer maintain tempo, Iraq had to rely on artillery to sustain pressure. But artillery is only powerful when it is protected and guided by eyes. Self-propelled artillery is designed to fire quickly and then relocate, reducing the risk of counter-battery fire. Systems such as the 2S1, 2S3, and M109 offered tactical mobility, suitable for fire support, in offensive formations or in-depth defense. In reality, that advantage was rarely exploited. Lacking counter-battery radar and an effective reconnaissance network, many artillery units fired in an almost blind state. Once their positions were exposed, firing sites were easily detected and struck. And without accompanying air defense cover, shoot and scoot became more of a slogan than a real capability. Iraqi self-propelled artillery did not lose because the guns were inferior, but because they could not survive in an environment of constant hunting. Towed artillery was cheap, easy to deploy in large numbers, and suitable for pre-planned defensive positions. Iraq fielded many towed guns emplaced in fortifications to hold areas and fire according to prepared plans. But the weakness of towed artillery is its immobility. When movement is required, it is slow. When withdrawal is needed, it is difficult. In a battle space where static targets are easily detected and accurately struck, the life expectancy of towed guns becomes short. Large numbers could not compensate for standing still too long in a war dominated by long-range precision strikes. When artillery came under attack from above, the protective burden shifted to ground-based air defense. But air defense is only strong when it has time, an early warning network, and a favorable electronic environment. The ZSU-234 Shilka and ZSU-572 represented low-altitude air defense based on volume of fire. At the right altitude, they could create dangerous fire zones and force targets to evade. However, most effective strikes in Desert Storm did not occur at the altitudes these guns controlled. When forced to open fire, their positions were also easily revealed, making them priority targets for rapid destruction. Anti-aircraft guns were not inherently weak, but the opponent chose methods of attack that kept them from ever reaching their targets. The SA-6 and SA-8 represented mobile surface-to-air missile systems capable of protecting formations at low to medium altitude. When their radars were active, they created threat zones that forced enemy aircraft to reconsider flight paths. But radar emissions themselves became beacons for the opponent to lock onto. In an environment saturated by electronic warfare and suppression of enemy air defenses, crews often faced a harsh choice: turn on radar to fight and accept the risk of rapid retaliation, or turn it off and become almost blind. The SA-6 and SA-8 did not fail because the systems themselves were useless, but because the electromagnetic battlefield was controlled by the opponent. Iraqi engineers and recovery units performed their roles effectively during the preparation phase, digging fortifications, laying obstacles, and recovering vehicles. Platforms such as the T-54/55 ARV, Type 65 3 ARV, BAT-M, and MTU-20 contributed to a layered defensive system before combat erupted. But once the war shifted to a high-tempo phase, safe space for recovery operations nearly vanished. Many damaged vehicles were abandoned as formations collapsed too quickly. Rear areas could not reach forward in time, and any slow activity became a liability. Engineers and recovery units did not fail their mission. They were defeated by speed. Desert Storm is not a story of Iraq lacking equipment. It is the story of a large ground force forced into static fighting, stripped of mobility, and unable to survive when the opponent saw first and struck accurately from long range. When the sky belonged to one side, the ground of the other was reduced to a sequence of targets being neutralized one by one. If you want to continue dissecting each layer of military power and the lessons of the battlefield, follow the channel for the next analytical installments.